Hi, my name is Darlene Libby, and I will be speaking to you about Mary Wollstonecraft. She was one of the founders of feminism. She states education is viewed in a false light, meaning education should be for all. Her foundation of philosophy was from John Locke's view of the mind, which says reason guides the will, and virtue is to think right, is to act right. Wollstonecraft's first works was The Thoughts on the Education of Daughters. It was based on her experience as a teacher, and she believed that children can comprehend reason. We should question what children are asked to do habitually. In her chapter, Duty to Parents, she protests the misuse of authority, pushes for parents to allow their children to freely use their minds, not to stifle a child's spirit, in particular, the father's power over a child. She encourages children to play among their peers. That will encourage them to find a love for humanity, and that humanity will turn into compassion and trains a child to become a good citizen. She calls for the abolishment of boarding schools, that they stifle any kind of relationship a child will have. And a child needs to be nurtured, not only from their mother and from their father, but from their friends. She also found that private schools only catered to the wishes of the parents and did not teach what was needed, but rather what could be shown off. Her answer was the national day schools to be funded by the government. In her vindication of the rights of women, she calls for girls and boys to be provided the same education, at least until the age of 8, which was the end of primary schools in that time. She declares, a woman's first duty is to themselves and then as a mother. If a woman drives towards the intellectual and moral majority, then she will in turn teach that to her child. Coeducation and uniforms were requested to ensure that class bias was ruled out. Her message, women can take control of themselves through education. Rousseau, opposed to the concept of coeducation, believed women couldn't intellectually grasp reason. Wollstone's counter-argument was Rousseau's account would mean that women do not possess a soul. Godwin criticized her work more on its arrangement and grammar. Warnick called the vindication a rambling of sorts and full of misgivings. The Vindication of the Rights of Women was a bestseller among Europe and the United States. Women were embracing her views. However, life gave her a misfortunate turn. After the birth of her second child, she died 11 days later. Godwin, her then husband, wrote her memoir, which included her affairs and her suicide attempts. Against everyone's better judgment, Godwin had it published. Critics said her vindication of the rights of women versus how she lived was a full-on contradiction. Her work was discarded. It wasn't until 100 years later did Wollstonecraft's works resurface in the women's suffrage movement and gain her her due accolades. I have a hard time criticizing her works. If anything, I admire her courageousness. Even with her execution to have women just enrolled into primary but not secondary schools was appropriate because at the time, men were not open to a woman's opinion. She understood that change took gradual steps so it could be successful. I find her works acceptable for the period, and it was a stepping stone for women's equality in education.